The groan of the iron beast was a familiar lullaby, a constant companion on these endless tracks that sliced through the raw, untamed heart of the Arizona Territory. Inside the rattling passenger car, the air was a thick, cloying soup of coal, smoke, stale sweat, and the faint, unsettling scent of fear that clung to desperate souls. My name's Silas. 60 years etched across my face, more dust than dreams in my pockets. I was just another anonymous shadow in the flickering lamplight, a grizzled prospector with a worn hat pulled low, blending into the tapestry of humanity. Seeking fortune or escape, the boisterous drifters, the wide-eyed immigrant families clutching their meager belongings, and the occasional slick-haired gambler eyeing the cards with an almost religious fervor, all bound for the dusty promises of Tombstone. I'd been riding this iron horse for 2 days, a journey designed to lull even the most restless spirit into a stupor. The relentless clack, clack, clack of the wheels against the rails usually sang me to sleep, but today a discordant note vibrated deep within my gut. It wasn't the usual jitters of a lone man on the move, nor the lingering discomfort from the hardtack I'd choked down for breakfast. This was a low, insistent hum of dread, a primal alarm bell ringing in the quiet corners of my mind. My eyes, accustomed to scanning endless horizons for the faintest whisper of trouble, kept snagging on the desolate panorama outside. Sagebrush stretched to infinity under a sky the color of bleached bone, broken only by the skeletal fingers of sun-baked mesas. Across the aisle, a young couple, barely out of their teens, clung to each other, their hands intertwined, their faces, illuminated by the dusty light filtering through the window, held an innocent, fragile hope that, for a fleeting moment, pricked at the hardened shell around my own heart. Further down, a stern-faced businessman, all starched collar and meticulous pocket watch, was lost in the cryptic scrawl of his ledger, oblivious to anything beyond his numbers. They were all dreaming their own dreams, caught in the monotonous rhythm of the journey, completely unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon. About an hour after our last stop, a nameless water tower blistering under the midday sun, I noticed it. A subtle shift in the wind, a whisper of something sharp and acrid, not the familiar tang of coal, and then a glint, not the playful dance of sunlight on rock, but a cold, hard sparkle far off in the distance, swallowed almost immediately by the vastness of the desert. Most would have dismissed it as nothing, a trick of the shimmering heat, but my eyes, honed by years of surviving on instinct in unforgiving lands, had seen that glint before. On bloody battlefields, in tense standoffs, in the chilling moment before a deadly ambush. It was metal, and it was impossibly out of place. My gaze narrowed, sweeping the horizon again. The train was picking up speed now, chugging relentlessly towards a shallow canyon, a narrow cut through the ancient rock, a natural choke point. Suddenly, the pieces slammed into place, the acrid smell, the metallic glint, the timing leading us straight into that bottleneck. This wasn't just another stretch of track. This was an ambush. A cold dread seeped into my bones, followed by a surge of adrenaline that hammered against my ribs. I looked around the car again, at the trusting faces still lost in their own worlds. I could try to warn them, but how? A lone old man, claiming to have seen a phantom glint in the endless desert? They'd dismiss me as a lunatic, or worse, a drunkard hallucinating from the heat. But what if I was right? The thought of those innocent faces, especially that young couple facing down whatever terror awaited us, twisted my insides into knots. My hand instinctively dropped to the familiar weight of the old Colt revolver I always carried, tucked beneath my worn jacket. It was heavy, comforting, and in this moment, a lifeline. The train roared, its mighty breath echoing off the canyon walls as we plunged deeper into the narrow pass. The air grew still, heavy with an unnatural quiet, as if even the desert held its breath. This was it. I had to act. Silas saw the danger, but how could he convince a car full of strangers? What would you do if you saw something no one else believed? Stick around to see if his instincts were right and what desperate measures he'll take next. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more incredible untold stories from the wild frontier. My mind became a whirlwind of desperate calculations. How do you stop a speeding train when every soul on board perceives you as nothing more than an aging, insignificant passenger? Yelling would trigger instant chaos, a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. And panic in a confined space, with armed men undoubtedly waiting just beyond the thin metal walls, was not just a recipe for disaster, it was a death sentence. I needed to do something drastic, something undeniable, an action so profound it would shatter their complacency and force them to confront the imminent danger. I pushed myself up from the worn seat, my old joints groaning in protest like a forgotten hinge. The businessman, startled from his ledger, looked up, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "Everything all right, old-timer?" he grumbled, his voice laced with impatience. I ignored him, my gaze fixed on the front of the car, on the door leading to the next carriage, and beyond that, the very heart of this iron beast, the engine. The conductor, a young man with a meticulously trimmed mustache, was making his rounds, his punch snapping rhythmically as he processed tickets. He spotted me heading towards the door and frowned, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Sir, you need to stay in your seat," he asserted, his voice firm but polite. "No time," I mumbled, my voice a dry rasp, barely audible above the train's rumble. My eyes darted to the emergency brake lever, clearly marked with bold, stark lettering near the conductor's station. It was my only chance. It was also an act of mutiny, a guaranteed way to cause an uproar, to invite scorn and potentially a jail cell. But what was the alternative? To sit idly by and watch them all fall prey to the wolves lurking in the shadows? As we plunged deeper into the canyon's maw, the light outside began to dim, casting long, menacing shadows that danced like specters on the walls. I could almost feel their presence, the cold steel of their rifles, the hungry glint in their eyes. This was the moment. My hand shot out, grabbing the conductor by the arm, my grip surprisingly strong for a man of my years. He recoiled, startled, his eyes widening. "What in blazes? Ambush!" I whispered, my voice rough, my eyes burning into his, trying to convey the undeniable truth of my words. "Up ahead! I saw them!" he scoffed, pulling his arm away, his initial shock giving way to indignation. "Old man, you've been drinking too much moonshine. Let go." There was no more time for polite persuasion, no room for doubt. With a surge of adrenaline I didn't know I still possessed, I lunged, pushing past him. He stumbled backward, shouting in alarm. The other passengers, roused from their sleepy stupor, stared, some gasping, others looking openly alarmed. "What's going on?" someone cried out, their voice laced with fear. My hand closed around the cold, unforgiving metal handle of the emergency brake. It was heavy, resistant, almost as if it fought back. I could hear the conductor's frantic shouts. Behind me, "Stop him, he's crazy!" But the sounds were distant, muted by the roaring in my ears, by the fierce resolve in my heart. With a guttural grunt, I pulled the lever down with every ounce of strength I had left. The world exploded. A deafening shriek of metal on metal tore through the air, a sound that scraped against the very bones of the canyon as the brakes locked with a terrifying finality. The train lurched violently, a monstrous beast suddenly rearing on its hind legs, throwing passengers forward like rag dolls. Luggage, hatboxes, and personal effects became airborne projectiles, crashing from overhead racks. Screams of pure, unadulterated fear and confusion ripped through the car. The young couple were flung against each other, their faces pale with shock, their innocence momentarily shattered. The businessman bellowed in outraged disbelief. The sudden deceleration was brutal, a sickening wrenching that threatened to tear me apart. I braced myself against the wall, my teeth rattling in my skull. The train screeched to a final shuddering halt, a defeated groan echoing through the canyon. Silence, profound and eerie, descended upon the air, broken only by the frantic whispers of the bewildered passengers and the slow, agonizing creaking of the cooling metal. And then, from outside, came the sound. The distinct, chilling click-clack of rifle bolts being cocked, a sound that brought a stark, undeniable reality to the terror. Silas took the ultimate risk and stopped the train. But now, they're trapped, surrounded by armed outlaws. Can a lone old man and a carriage full of bewildered passengers possibly stand a chance? Hit that notification bell so you don't miss how this incredible true story unfolds in the final chapter. What's the craziest thing you've ever done to help a stranger? The sudden, oppressive silence that followed the train's violent halt was infinitely more terrifying than the chaos that preceded it. Every eye in the car was fixed on me, a tangled web of fear, anger, and utter bewilderment reflected in their stunned gazes. The conductor, regaining his footing, stormed towards me, his face a furious crimson. "You old fool, what in God's name have you done? You'll be arrested for this, I swear," he spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Before he could lay a hand on me, a voice boomed from outside, cutting through the stunned silence like a knife. "All right, folks, everyone out, nice and slow, and no heroics, unless you want a bullet in your hide." A collective gasp swept through. The car, a fragile balloon of hope deflating into thin air. The businessman's face, minutes ago a mask of indignation, went from furious red to ashen white. The young couple huddled together, their tremors now visible, their innocent dream abruptly replaced by a waking nightmare. The conductor's anger evaporated like morning mist, replaced by a cold, numbing dread. Through the grimy window, I saw them. A dozen armed men, hard-faced and heavily armed, emerging from the gnarled sagebrush, their grim visages partially obscured by wide-brimmed hats. They were already moving, positioning themselves with chilling efficiency around the halted train, their rifles glinting ominously in the harsh sunlight. "See?" I rasped, my voice low but clear, cutting through the palpable fear that now filled the car. "I told you." The conductor stared at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrible realization. His defiance crumbled, replaced by a flicker of understanding, and then, unmistakably, gratitude. He had scoffed at my warning, dismissed me as a madman. But now the cold, hard truth was undeniable. As we were roughly herded off the train, my hand never left the familiar, comforting weight of the Colt, still tucked beneath my jacket. I watched the bandits with a practiced eye. They were organized, professional, moving with a predatory precision. Their target was clearly the strongbox in the mail car, that much was obvious. But their plan relied on the element of surprise, on the train being in motion, on a swift, clean getaway. My desperate act had shattered their carefully laid scheme. One of the bandits, a burly man with a nasty scar bisecting his cheek, spotted me, his eyes narrowing. Well, what do we have here? An old man playing hero, are we?" He raised his rifle, the cold glint of the barrel a stark contrast to the burning sun. "We need to work together," I whispered to the conductor, who was now standing next to me, his face grim, his knuckles white. "They're outnumbered if we fight smart, if we hit them where they don't expect it." He hesitated for only a second, a fleeting moment of internal debate, then gave a decisive nod. "What's your plan, old-timer?" he whispered back, a newfound respect. In his tone, the passengers were terrified, but as the bandits began to search them, roughly pulling valuables from pockets and bags, some began to stir, a flicker of defiance in their eyes. The businessman, surprisingly, found his voice, a tremor running through it, but still defiant. "You won't get away with this. The law will hunt you down." This was our moment. I caught the conductor's eye. We both knew we had to create a diversion, something loud and disorienting. "You want the strong box?" I bellowed, my voice ringing out with surprising strength, startling even myself. "It's not in the mail car. They moved it. It's in the baggage car." The bandits paused, looking at each other, confusion etched on their faces. The scarred leader scowled, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What are you talking about, old man?" That was all we needed. As their attention shifted, a prearranged signal, a quick, subtle nod, passed between the conductor and the train engineer, a stout man who had remained hidden within the engine, waiting for his moment. A sudden, deafening blast of steam erupted from the locomotive, a high-pitched shriek that momentarily blinded and disoriented the bandits, spraying hot vapor into the air. In that precious split second, I drew my old Colt, the familiar weight in my hand, and fired a single deafening warning shot into the arid air. The conductor, bolder than I'd given him credit for, used the distraction to lunge, tackling the nearest bandit with a surprising ferocity. Chaos erupted. The other passengers, seeing an opportunity, seized it. They pushed back, their fear momentarily replaced by a raw, desperate surge of resistance. The young couple, fueled by adrenaline, surprising even themselves, joined the fray. Their fear transformed into a fierce, protective determination. The element of surprise was gone for the bandits. They were now fighting on our terms, in a confined space, against an unexpected, furious resistance. We fought with the desperation of cornered animals, with the raw courage born of survival. The engineer, wielding a heavy wrench like a madman, emerged from the engine, a blur of motion and furious swings. Passengers, fueled by rage and the primal instinct to protect themselves and their loved ones, used whatever they could find: heavy luggage, desperate fists, even a discarded lantern, swung with surprising force. It was a messy, brutal fight, but we had the advantage of unexpected numbers, of sheer desperate will, and of a righteous fury that burned brighter than any bandit's greed. Soon, several bandits were subdued, groaning on the dusty ground, their weapons scattered. Others, seeing their comrades fall, fled into the unforgiving brush, leaving their wounded behind, their cries swallowed by the vastness of the desert. The scarred leader, seeing his plan crumble into dust, made a desperate run for it, disappearing like a phantom into the shimmering heat. As the dust settled, the silence that followed was different this time. A silence of exhaustion, of profound shock, but also of an overwhelming, palpable relief. Passengers slumped to the ground, breathing heavily, some tending to minor scrapes and bruises, others simply staring blankly at the sky. The conductor, bruised but triumphant, looked at me, a genuine wide smile spreading across his grimy face. "You saved us, Silas," he said, his voice thick with a profound respect. I just nodded, my old bones aching with every fiber of my being, but a quiet satisfaction blooming in my chest. I was just another passenger, until I wasn't. And in that moment, under the vast, indifferent sky of the Arizona Territory, we weren't just passengers and crew. We were survivors, bound by an unforeseen alliance, forged in the crucible of danger. And for a grizzled old prospector, that felt like finding a vein of gold, pure and shimmering, in the heart of the desolate wilderness.